Hey appraisers, welcome to the TrueTracts training video. So I'm going to go through the whole process with you today, and hopefully by the time you're finished watching the video, you're going to be ready to use the tool confidently and competently. We've set up some timestamps so that you can jump directly into the topic you're looking for. You can find those in the description below. So what is TrueTracts? It's a powerful tool that enhances the appraisal process to ensure the most accurate and data-driven results. It leverages technology and data science to handle the tasks that they're best suited for, while relying on your expertise to ultimately drive the process and then reconcile the analysis. And so today's training, we're going to focus on the first two tabs of TrueTracts. The first tab is going to help you define and fine tune your subject submarket in a much more data driven way, removing any perception of arbitrary bias. It's also going to help you identify competing submarkets from which you're going to be able to gather more competing property data, which is going to ultimately fuel your market analysis and fine tune your adjustments. Then, once you've defined your market and you've curated a data set of competing properties, you're going to move to the second tab where we're going to analyze all of that curated data through chart visualizations. You'll also see your time adjustment indicators and review the dynamic commentary that's been created for you. And then finally, you can export the information through our total integration, where it will import the heat map, the charts, dynamic commentary, fill out your 1004MC, the price and age at the top of page one, the comparable sales and listings at the top of page two. And if you're using a different form filler than total, it's still going to generate a PDF with all of that information in it for you so that you can put that right in your report. So before I get started with the training, I want to first show you a quick session I did to demonstrate how fast and efficiently that the tool can be used and the analysis can be completed. Okay, we're almost finished up here and we've completed an entire market analysis using the tool in about 2 minutes and 49 seconds. And now back to the training. So the first thing we need to do is enter the subject property address. And so the tool is telling me like that we have coverage in that market. And then the next thing we need to do is what is the property type? And this is the style, not the ownership. So detached is self-explanatory. When we're dealing with townhomes or apartments, aka condos, again, style, not ownership. Think of a townhouse as it's attached and there are units above and below the subject, above or below the subject. And think of an apartment as a traditional condo and a high rise. There's typically going to be a unit either above or below the subject. And so I'm going to go ahead and click detached. And now I'm going to enter in the properties, subject properties features. And hit save and classify. So let's quickly touch on the data that TrueTracts has access to. So it has a data feed of all of the properties in a given market that have sold in the last 5 years. The feed's updated daily and it includes actives, pendings, canceled, expireds, closed, all of that. Okay, so what are these dots down here? So the tool has expanded out to look at 6,000 home sales around the subject from the last 5 years, and it's using machine learning to group them into different clusters. Each cluster represents a group of properties that have a similar relationship between features and sale price. On the right, it provides a probability that the subject belongs to each of those clusters. In this case, it's more than likely going to be cluster 8. So keep in mind, these are only meant to be used as a rough draft to help you start where you're going to define your subject submarket. After that, you're going to iterate on those initial boundaries. And so this is just a very rough draft starting point. So if I were to click cluster 8, it shows me where all those properties are. I can also come up here to the statistics tab and I can cycle through and see where the subject lies within each of these features. And so I'm just cycling using the left and the right arrows and can quickly go through and kind of look at all those different metrics. And so once you've chosen that highest probability, cluster 8, you're not going to need these colored circles anymore, and you're not going to need these probabilities. So then you're going to be focused on drawing your core cluster and going from there. Okay, so to draw the first iteration of the subject submarket, we're going to click this little plus down here. And I use the word iteration because utilizing the data and the analytics of the tool to define this submarket in a data driven way, it's an iterative process. And we want the data to kind of guide us. So the first data point is this initial cluster. And so I'm going to draw my boundaries. I'm going to stay pretty broad on this first boundaries. Okay, and now that we have the boundaries drawn, we need to apply the filters to the data to ensure we're gathering competing properties. Remember, the GSEs, Fannie and Freddie, they want us to be utilizing a data set of competing properties for analyzing and reporting the market trends and the time adjustments. As a general rule, we want at least 100 properties in this subject submarket data set because it's going to train a model on those properties and then apply those to a bunch of other properties to kind of understand locational value. So you can see the counts. These are all the properties in the last 5 years that lie within those boundaries in the top right. This is the distribution. And so as I start to apply these filters, again, I'm applying, it's not exactly what I would do maybe if I were looking for comps, but pretty similar. If I'm in an area where I have a ton of properties, I can be a little bit more restrictive on the filters and the range that I apply. And if I'm in a more rural market and I'm really hungry for data, then I might be a little looser with those filters. And so I'm going through here and you can kind of see where my subject lies. You can always see the subject up here. And as I apply the filters, you can see how many homes are left. And this works just like your MLS. 3 minus just means 3 or less garage spaces. And then also, it's generally a good idea to impose a raw sale price filter. Best practice here is just to remove the outliers. So in this example, I might go 300,000 to maybe 800,000. I just want to cut off those major outliers out of the data. Okay, and so I'm done with that. I still have 444 properties remaining, so I should be good to go. I'm going to go ahead and click Create Cluster. Okay, so this is where it gets really cool. Let's talk about what's happening in the background. The tool is training a statistical model on the past 5 years of competing home sales within the appraiser defined boundaries and filters we just applied. The statistical model is then applied to every surrounding home sale that lies within the defined filters. Based on what it learned from the model, it tries to predict the sale price of each of those black dots. So every black dot you see here, it's taking this model, it's applying it to that black dot, and it's trying to predict what did that home sell for. If the predicted sale price, is within 3% of the actual sale price, then we know locationally that property is similar and it's going to be colored dark green on the heat map. If the predicted sale price is within 4 to 6%, it's colored light green and it can be considered fairly similar in location. And then if the prediction is lower by 6%, it would be a shade of blue. The bigger the difference, the darker the blue, and then the same for the red. And so what we see here is over here to the west, we have properties after controlling for the features and for time. These are selling for significantly less. We have a pocket down here, significantly more. And then we have some similar in there. And then any areas where you see white and there are no black dots, well, there were no home sales that lie within the filters that we applied. And so we don't want to consider those at all because they're just not relevant. Okay, so let's not worry about the overall heat map for now. Let's continue to focus on defining the subject submarket. So it looks like maybe we went a little too big on version 1. As you can see, there's a little bit of blue in here, there's some red in here. And so ideally, there would only be shades of green in the submarket. And so let's iterate on those initial boundaries because when we draw these boundaries and apply those filters, that model, that's statistical model that's being trained, is not only being applied to the dots out here, but it's reapplying to itself to try and predict and make sure everything in here is similar. And so it's learned that these look like they're selling for a little bit more. And so let's be more specific with the properties that we're including in these boundaries. And so the subject right here, so let's iterate. We come hover over here and we click this polygon. That's going to allow us to draw new boundaries. And so maybe I want to go here. It looks like most of this over here is really similar as well. And I could come down here, maybe all the way to Thomas, over to here, and up. And so same filters. I'm not going to change any of the filters. I'm going to go ahead and click Update Cluster. And it's retraining the model based on these properties and applying those across the board to kind of create a new heat map. Okay, and so now I feel really good about the subject submarket boundaries. It's mostly green in here. And so this is kind of what I want to go with my subject boundaries. Let's zoom out for a minute and take a look at the overall area. It's obviously a north suburb, or this is Phoenix, not a suburb. And when we zoom out, we can get rid of the black dots if we want, so we can see more of the color, or you can put those back on so you can see where those home sales are. What's really cool is, so I picked this property. I was just testing a lot of properties, and I picked this one randomly, and I ran the tool and kind of went through the iteration. And I wanted to make sure this made sense. So I asked a couple of really good appraisers in Phoenix who have worked in that market for 15 plus years. And it was really cool the feedback I got. I just basically asked them, like, hey, on this new tool, like we're creating these heat maps and trying to tease out the locational differences. Does this map make sense to you? Um, and so the feedback that I got was that this area down here, they called it between the sevens. So they said there's an area down here. I'm going to take a minute to just show you guys this. So here's 7th Street and 7th Avenue. And so you can see here, it picked that up. This is 29%, 33%. These are selling for significantly more after controlling all the features. I guess this is a historic neighborhood, very desirable. And then there's only one or two sales here that lie within those filters. Remember, there's homes here, and we can switch to a satellite view if we want. Um, but it's in white because there's no home sales that lie within the filters, so we don't care so much about those. Then they explain, like up to the northeast, you have the Biltmore, and so there's a country club up here, and that's more expensive, and over here into Scottsdale, and then up here they were saying there's some nice shops and restaurants and maybe a better school district, and so you could see it's picking that up. It's not as drastic down here. Down here it was 29, 33%. Up here it looks like 8 to 9% higher. And so it doesn't mean I can't use a comp from here, but if I did, I might want to consider a location adjustment for that comp. Okay, so let's talk about these two circles over here. The first one, SS, or Subject Submarket, this is the data set that you just defined. There's 495 home sales in the last 5 years that lie within the boundaries and the filters that you just applied. So this area is often the same or similar to your neighborhood and is the submarket that you should expect to get most of your comps from most of the time. So when I'm searching for comps, I'm probably searching in here somewhere. If I got to go out, I would go over here. Maybe I would come over here. But most of, on a non-complex property, I would guess 95% of the time, your comps are going to come from your subject submarket. Now, we don't have it built yet, but there will be a feature in the future where you'll be able to add a neighborhood. So if you feel like this is not representative of the neighborhood, but you did want to define it as your subject submarket, then you'll be able to create a different boundary for your neighborhood. And the reason that's important is the neighborhood boundary or this. If you don't create a neighborhood, we're going to go with this. If you do, then we'll go with the neighborhood. That's going to be what's used to fill out the price, the age at the top of page 1, the top of page 2, the 1004 MC, all of that data is what will fill out that. So that's coming by February 4th. That will be in the tool. Okay, so while we have 495 home sales in this cluster, That's over 5 years. Um, and remember during COVID, there were probably more sales. So you have less than 100 sales probably in the last year. And so we want to get some more data. Since the heat map, after controlling for time and features, now knows the areas that are locationally similar to the subject, it automatically grabs all of those sales that are located in the dark green areas and adds them to this CCS or competing submarket cluster. Remember, based on the statistical model that's trained by the subject submarket, the tool has successfully predicted the sale price of the homes in these areas within 3%. And since they also lie within the filters, we're determining that those are considered similar both locationally and similar in home features. And so if we feel that a potential buyer would consider a property in those locations as an alternative to the subject property, then we want to include them as a competing submarket in our broader market area. The competing submarket is extremely valuable, not only providing us with additional sales to help us truly analyze and understand what's happening in the market, but also to act as a guide for where we could look for additional comps when there's not enough comps in the subject submarket. Also can help us defend against an ROV by pointing out any comps that were given to us. Hey, they lied up in this area here, and you can easily point out to the underwriter that's a different market. So if we want to see where these properties are located, we can just click on that and it's going to show them. And so if I zoom out here, you can see where all of those properties are located. And it basically doubled our data set, which is really cool. And so now we've defined our subject submarket. We've defined these are potentially some competing submarkets. But what if we don't think some of those competing submarkets are appropriate for the market area that we want for whatever reason? You now have the opportunity to constrain your overall market area, which right now by default is these 6,000 properties around the subject, by clicking the dotted circle next to the CS. So I'm going to go ahead and click this. And so if I zoom out, I may decide I don't want to go this far north for whatever reason. I know that area and it's just not the same. I don't want to consider that in my market area. So I can cut those out. Let's say I don't want to go past, what is this, I-17. Again, I don't know this market area. I'm making this up right now. And let's say I come over here and I go into Scottsdale a little bit, and then I come up, I go up this interstate here, and I define that as my market area. So now we have both the subject submarket, we have the overall market area, and then these would be considered little competing submarkets. Okay, so you're usually going to stop there, and then you're going to move over to the market analysis tab. But I want to show you one more feature that you can use when you still want more data. Recall that the competing submarket is all the properties located in a similar green area with similar features. The model predicted the sale price to be within 3%. Since you're desperate for more data to analyze and for the trends and the time adjustments, you may want to include the light green areas as well. And remember, the light green areas, the model predicted the sale price within 4 to 6%, so very similar locations. So what would I do in that case? I can click this plus button down here, and I can define an additional submarket. And that will be labeled as AS. And so I could come in here and say, what about all of these green properties here? I want to include those because I know this market and I think these are also really similar. I can add those. And I just grabbed another 106 properties. Maybe, let's see if there are any other light green areas with a ton of properties. Not really. So maybe that's just where I stop with that. And now instead of the original amount of properties, now I have a bunch more and I can analyze those as well. Okay, so everything we've done so far has been about analytics and letting the data drive the process of defining the subject submarket, the market area, and the competing submarket, and really zoning in on and focusing on how are we going to grab the best data set possible of similar properties in similar locations, so that we have not only more data, but we have better data to analyze. And what is that going to do? That's going to help us get to the source of truth, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand what's really going on in this market, and how do I visualize that, analyze that, and then convey that to the client in a way that's easily understood. And so that's everything up to this point. Now, there is a compliance situation where the 1004 and the 1073, they ask for neighborhood specific data. And so oftentimes your subject submarket will be, it's synonymous with your neighborhood. But we want you to be free to define your subject submarket however you want. And I think oftentimes it might be bigger and encompass a broader area than just your neighborhood. Um, and so what we've done is we've built in the ability to define your neighborhood. And what is that going to do? So what the neighborhood is, you're going to define a neighborhood, and it's going to be used exclusively to fill out the fields here in the neighborhood section of the 1004, 1073. It's going to be used to populate the fields of the top page too, and that's going to be used to fill out the 1004MC. Remember, we don't care if there's not enough data in the 1004MC to determine a trend anymore, because we have something way better than that with TrueTracts and the analysis that we're performing there. And so we have some commentary you can add, but we can talk about that later. Okay, so let's get started. If you're right now, you see that this is gold and black. Normally this was black before, but by default, it's going to be gold and black. And that's going to mean that the black represents the subject submarket, the gold represents the neighborhood. And so if we want to split that apart, if I say that this area right here of Isle White Park is a very specific neighborhood, I simply hover over the neighborhood. You can see it's got the same amount of properties as the SS, the subject submarket, because they're the exact same. I simply click on that and I can define my neighborhood. And so let's say that I think my neighborhood, heck, it could even be this small. I mean, I'm not going to teach how to define neighborhoods. That's something you guys have been doing for years. So you guys, and I don't know this market, you guys define your neighborhood. We actually define it later on. It's not in this legend, but in the export, we define what Fannie and Freddie call the neighborhood. So you can define that neighborhood. And when you do, you can see now there's only been 27 sales in the past 12 months or past 5 years. And so that's what's going to be used. If we come over here to the market analysis and we scroll down to the bottom, it doesn't matter what's highlighted here. This section right here is filled out based on that neighborhood. This section right here is based on that neighborhood. And this section right here is going to be based on that neighborhood. So coming back here, if you do not define the neighborhood, it will default to the subject submarket. And so if I get rid of this neighborhood, we can see that it just defaults to that. Okay, so let's jump into some market analysis. Now that we've defined our market, we can come over here to the market analysis. And so you can look at the trend up here. You have the range of time that you want to look at. We can look at 5 years. We can look at shorter periods of time. But keep in mind that this up here, this indicator, this is based on a 12-month period. Remember that Fannie and Freddie, I think in the Fannie Mae selling guide, they updated it to say that the sale price trend, which is the box that you check on the top of page one, is to be based off a minimum of 12 months of data. And so what we're doing in the tool is we're looking at the effective date versus 12 months ago. And if it's higher today than it was then, it's increasing. If it's lower, it's decreasing. And if it's completely flat, it's stable. However, we give you the opportunity to change that. And so if this was up only like 1.2% year over year, you might say, oh, that's relatively stable. And so you can change that, and you can see it will change the color as well. So you have the ability to toggle these markets on and off. So I highly recommend you include both the subject submarket. Well, that's always, but I highly recommend you include those competing submarkets. We found in testing that when you include more data, especially when it's similar data and similar locations that lie within the same filters, it really improves the credibility of the analysis. And so I can take that off if I want, and I just have less home sales, or I can put it back on and have a stronger trend. And so I recommend keeping that on. That additional submarket I drew as an example, we could turn that on if we wanted to, but for this example, I'm going to leave that off. You also have tooltips kind of scattered throughout, so you can hover on any of those tooltips and it'll give you some information kind of about that section. So keep in mind that those are available. We also have some dynamic commentary below each chart. And so all of this follows a similar structure, but we're saying now you might wonder also this says 495 sales. That's over 5 years, remember. And down here we're talking about 12 months. And so there's been 92 similar home sales in the last 12 months in the subjects market area. The average adjusted sale price has increased from 502,000 at this point to 545, 541. An implied change is 7.8% based on this market. And this is the reconciliation statement. It's been reconciled to be, in this case, increasing. If it was 1.1%, you could probably mark stable. Also note here, you can kind of see some information there, which is just showing you kind of how we're making these decisions for you. But again, it's completely up to you to reconcile that trend. And then you can add commentary. So if I wanted to add another statement, I can add that. And then when I go to send this through the total integration or print to PDF, it will include whatever commentary I've added. Let's see what else. Okay, and I wanted to point out down here, these are your time adjustments. Now, we don't know what your comps are, so we don't know when they sold. So we can't give you comp one should be adjusted this, but we give you the monthly adjustment. And so if you have a comp that went under contract in July, you have an adjustment of 4.4%. And so you just go to total. If you're in total, you can type right there on the adjustment line 4.4%, enter, and it will make the adjustment based on the sale price. So you could do that for your comps there. These numbers are just based on the effective date going back approximately 30 days, so just following this red trend line. And so if the effective date is here and the median sale price or the trend line was at 540,000 and you have a comp that sold here at 519, it's just going to do the math and say what was the percent increase. And so these are going to be nonlinear adjustments. And you can see in this case, they are pretty linear. You can see the line's pretty linear, and it looks like that's 0.8, 0.7, 0.8, 0.7. So you could see 0.7 is a pretty similar increase, and then 0.6, this is only 0.5. And so anyway, it is the nonlinear amount that you're going to do the time adjustment. Okay, so I want to talk briefly about the underlying GAM model that's being utilized. So the GAM stands for Generalized Additive Model, and it's being used a lot in this tool. It's being used in the training of the Subject Submarket model. It's being used when you apply that model to predict the sale price of all the other properties. It's also being used to generate the charts and the trend line and determine the wiggliness of the red trend line and how flexible that is. And then it's also adjusting the sale prices of the comps prior to plotting them on this line, which we're going to get to in a minute. But what is GAM? GAM's a generalized additive model. It's a type of machine learning model that balances flexibility and interpretability. The interpretability part is important for appraisers. But it automatically learns the patterns from the data by fitting smooth curves to show how different features like GLA or lot size impact property values, and by modeling the time trends to extract accurate time adjustments. Why are we using GAM? GAM captures nonlinear relationships. Unlike like a simple linear regression, it's able to figure out is there a nonlinear relationship, and it adjusts for those differences in property features, ensuring that the time trends reflect the actual market changes. Unlike simpler models, it provides more accurate and defensible time adjustments. Okay, let's dig into some of these charts that we have here. So let's start with the sale price trend chart. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on here. So a few things to know. Each sale, so every dot on here, is being adjusted for feature differences using the GAM model. So rather than raw sale price, we're actually utilizing the adjusted sale price. This decreases the uncertainty and helps provide a more accurate view of what the true market trend is. I want to show you guys an example real quick. Okay, so this is an example I used on the webinar for those of you who were on it, introducing TrueTracts. But what we learned was by using the adjusted sale price, we decrease the uncertainty and the true market trend that's going on. So what you see here is that this top graph is the raw sale price. And you can see there's a pretty wide range. The dots are a little more scattered. You can also see the trend line here. Over the past year, it looks like it's increasing. This point is higher than this point. But when we look at the adjusted sale price, you can see the dots get a lot closer. Um, but well, look what happened to the trend line. The trend line is actually decreasing a little bit. And so by adjusting those sale prices, we realize that the market's actually going down and not up. And I did an analysis to see, like, from a comp that sold around 6 months ago, like, what would the difference be if I use this trend versus this trend? And it was like $50,000 difference on what that comp would adjust. One of them was going to adjust up 3 or 4%, the other down 3 or 4%. And so the difference is significant. And so this is really, I think, illustrates kind of how we want to get to the heart of, like, what is really going on? What's the real trend? And I think the best way to do that is use the adjusted sale prices of the comps. Okay, so there's some other stuff going on here. We're also plotting the sales based on their contract date and not their closing date. So we know that we adjust our comps based on when they went under contract, not when they closed. But in the past, we've always extracted the adjustments based on the closing date, which to me doesn't make sense. And so we're actually using the contract date here. We're also, it doesn't show it here, we're going to be including pending sales. And so this whole area here will have the most recent data and pending sales. We'll be using sale to final list price ratio trend. We'll use this to be able to adjust those pendings to predict what they're going to sell for. And that way you're going to get really be able to fine tune the most recent 30 days and see what's going on in that market. Okay, I'm excited to demonstrate that pending sales are now live. And so you can see the icon here. We can toggle those on or off. If you hover over here, it explains what's going on here. It explains how we're using the sale to final list price ratio to adjust these to predict what they're going to sell for based on market data. We're not guessing. We're actually using the real data that's been analyzed. So in this case, sale to final list price ratio, it's 96.2%. That's this point right here. And so we're going to adjust those down 3.8% to predict what they would sell for before plotting them on the line. And so this is really cool because you are really fine tuning what's going on in that last 30-day period, because that's typically when pending sales are going on. And you can see the trend line changes. It's up 6.8%. But when we include those, it looks like there's 5 pendings in this market. It actually comes down a little bit because more of them are selling for less than only one above the trend line. And so if we look at that only on the subject submarket data, there's less of them, but they're all below the line. And so that changes the trend. The trend, if we're looking at just the subject submarket data set, up 4.2. When we want to know what's happening more recently, it actually brings it down a little bit. And so this is a really cool tool to really understand what's happening more recently in the market. And then there's the dynamic commentary. We kind of went over that already, and I want to just reiterate that the trend that you're checking on the box on page 1 is based on a minimum of 12 months of data. The adjustments that you make to the comps are based on when they went under contract and what was going on at that time versus the effective date. Okay, so I wanted to point out one more thing here on the sale price trend. If you're using comps that sold over 12 months ago, let's say that you had some that sold almost 2 years ago, you're going to want to filter 2 years, because what that's going to allow you to do is it's going to add an additional line here that's going to give you the adjustments for those older comps. If you use comps really old and you want to go 5 years, it will give you all of that information here as well. Okay, so moving on to the supply. I want to point out the tooltip here. So we state the information up here, and then we try to reconcile that for you. There is no definitive rule for what constitutes a shortage or an oversupply. And so if you look here, this is what we're using. Anything under 4 months is going to be considered a shortage. 4 to 6 in balance, and over 6 will be oversupply. But just like everything else, you get to control it. And so if you feel that 1.9 months is actually in balance, you're welcome to change that to in balance. You can also add any commentary you want there. Going down to marketing time, days on market. So this is another part. This is going to be used to check the box at the top, page one. This one would check the box under 90 days of marketing time. It's got the dynamic commentary down here and the change, and you can kind of see what's going on there. We have a tooltip. So just an FYI, we have removed the 5% of sales that had the highest days on market. To provide a clearer visual representation of the market, these sales were not removed from the calculations and did not affect the analysis or the average days on market. And so what we saw is if you have a sale that had a marketing time of 1,822 days, all of these dots got really scrunched at the bottom, and then you had one dot up here, and that's just not helpful to the reader or anybody. We do not remove that sale from the average calculation or current days on market. It's still calculated, it's just removed from the visual. We are also, just an FYI, we're using the cumulative time over the life of the listing and days on market. Some MLSs you don't have a choice, but some MLSs you can, the realtors play the games of resetting it by canceling, bringing it back on and all that, and resetting the marketing time. Okay. So sale to final list price ratio. We have two different ratios, sale to final and sale to original. So sale to final, and I think this is in the tooltip. Yeah, so this is a good way. A good way to use this data is for supporting the adjustments to the list prices of the comps that are under contract. So when you have a pending sale, you want to use this. So this, in this case, it would be 2.3%. You would adjust that comp down 2.3%, trying to anticipate what it'll actually close for. For this one, when you have an active listing, you don't know if that's the final list price yet, and so I recommend this as a better metric to use to adjust active listings. Also, a disclaimer on both of these. If you see the note there at the bottom, we have removed any sales with a ratio of less than 80% or greater than 120% from the chart. Again, just to make the chart more readable and digestible to the end user. They did not affect the analysis or the ratio or anything like that. We left them in for the calculations. Okay, and so distress sales, this is coming soon. We're working on some stuff there. There is a tooltip on this that basically says the blue line in the chart is representing a 31-day moving average. It's calculated by considering data from the 15 days before and the 15 days after. We can do more on that once this comes out and is ready, but I want you guys to keep in mind this is only as good as the data in your MLS. If your MLS is not reporting that a sale is distressed, short sale, foreclosure, the tool doesn't know that either. Similar with sales with seller concessions. So we have two different concession charts here. We have the percentage of the sales in the market that had seller concessions, and what does that trend look like? So you can see here, we're also using the 31-day moving average for those as well. And then we also have the average contribution percentage of those sales. And so if the average contribution percentage was 2%, the house sold for $500,000, that was a $10,000 on average seller contribution. Okay, we touched on this briefly before when we talked about the neighborhood section, but I want to give it its own due down here. So when you scroll down through now, the update has added this. And so now we have page one. This will get filled out for you. We have some notes here that it's going to explain. This is kind of what's going on here and some guidance from Fannie Mae Selling Guide. This pertains to this part over here, but this is basically all the sales in your neighborhood without filters. These decisions are based on your first charts. And so your sale price trend, whatever you reconcile as increasing, decreasing, or stable. Your housing supply trend is based on this. We put this as in shortage. You can change that, but that will check that box for you. And then days on market were less than 90 days. And so that's going to check that box for you. Okay, so we have that. We have top page two. So this is all the properties within just your neighborhood with the filters that you've selected applied to those. This is some notes here. This is just reminding you if you did not define specific neighborhood boundaries, it will just default, and this will include properties from your subject submarket. And then 1004MC, this is again your neighborhood. So this will get filled out for you. We're not going to make these decisions for you. That's up to you, but you can make those right in the tool and those will transfer into your report. So you'll make those decisions there, or you can wait and do it in your report. We've added some suggested commentary. I think this is super important. Um, this is a revision protection, basically. It's explaining that you have completed the 1004MC per the client's assignment conditions, what that data reflects, but then you're also explaining that you also completed and relied upon a much more robust market analysis with supporting charts and commentary, which has been attached. You're explaining that those are the charts and analyses that were relied on to reconcile the one unit housing trends, the time adjustments. And so I recommend you simply Control C, come down here, and when you have to summarize, you just add that in right there, and now you have your revision protection in if we can get them to read that. So that is the data that will go there. And now, let's say that we went through and we have made all of our decisions. You can see here there is dynamic commentary here. If I click yes, it says they are a significant factor. If I click no, it will say they are not considered to be a factor. But now that we're done with this, we're going to go ahead and click export. And so there's going to be a preview pop up. And so this is the commentary that we've written. We've had a lot of appraisers say, like, this is awesome, but how am I going to explain this to the client? We've done that for you. So we have a little explanation up here. You can pause the video and read that. We've talked about how we defined our subject submarket, how we applied our filters. If you do apply a price filter, we have you covered. We're saying this filter was only applied to remove extreme price outliers. We're not filtering by price. We don't want to get in trouble for that. The tool's training a statistical model on the past 5 years, so it's talking about that. We have our definitions for each of these areas. We have the heat map. This is dynamic, by the way. So what I recommend you doing is zooming in or out to the appropriate level so that you can, because that's the screenshot that's going to go in your report. This will not go in. If you see the black dots like this, just know in the bottom left corner, I suggest getting rid of those for this screenshot because I think this is a cleaner way to display the information. They're going to get the legend that explains everything about what's going on in the heat map. One more explanation of what's going on with market analysis and time adjustments and how those align with the Fannie Mae selling guide. It's explaining that, the time adjustments made may differ from the overall trend. And so again, a little bit of revision protection. And then we're going to go through and we have the charts included. And then at the very bottom, this will be a separate PDF that will go into your digital work file. So when I click export, it's going to start spinning. It's going to generate that export. Okay, and so you can see here, there's a little guidance at the top. If you're a total user, you only need to download this. This is a TDCX file. What that's going to do is it's going to automatically put this in your report, and it's going to automatically put this in your work file. So let's quickly talk about what each one of these are. So I'm going to open those up. So first we have the methodology. This is a appraiser white paper that goes over the methodology of TrueTracts and what's going on behind the scenes, and it goes through GAM and explains everything that's going on so that you can be compliant with USPAP Advisory Opinion 37, which is that you don't have to understand the statistical algorithm or the mathematical formulae and all that goes into a model, but you need to deem that it's credible, it produces consistent results, and it can be relied upon. And you need to be able to explain it at a high level. And what this white paper will do is it will get you there. If you watch the training and you've read this white paper, you're all good to go. You should be covered. If you're not, if you don't feel comfortable, please ask questions. Jump on our office hours. We'd be happy to help. The other PDF that's going to get put in your work file, if you're using Total, if you're not using Total, you can just drag it to your work file, is this information. So we're going to fill this out in the report, but we want you to have a hard copy in your work file so that you're protected 2 years later. If you end up in front of a state board, you can see exactly the decisions that you made prior to putting them in the tool or in the report. And then lastly, we have the actual, this is the meat and potatoes. This is, we already went over that. Okay, so let me jump back over here. So if you have the TDCX file, you're simply going to click that. It's going to download the TDCX file up here into my downloads. I'm going to click on that. It's going to now open that up in total. It's going to ask if I want to merge that into an open report or if I want to create a new one. For this example, I'm just going to create a new one so I can show you what it looks like. I'm going to pause it because total takes a little bit to open up on my computer. Okay, so that has now opened up. You can see the boxes are checked. This section's filled out. We got the top page 2 section filled out. We have the 1004MC filled out with the check boxes and the commentary. We have the charts, the explanation, the heat map, the charts. Now, this looks a little pixelated. This is common when importing things into Total. However, the PDF is much clearer. And when you send this to your client, when they view it, it will not be this pixelated. It's just showing you that in the tool. If you want, you can file print to PDF your report and look at it. It looks way better. I don't know why it doesn't look good in total. And then let's go to your digital work file real quick. And you will just see that the 1004MC report is there. The market analysis report is there that also goes into your report, and the white paper is there for you. So that's it. Okay, so how about we do a suburban example and then we'll do a rural example to wrap it up. So we're not going to go through the whole market conditions. We'll just do the heat map just to give you an idea of what to do. So we're going to do a property on the northwest side of Chicago. Let me zoom out here to show you guys where we're at. There's Chicago. This is where that property is. This is a northwest suburb. So I am going to first start by finding what is the cluster that we think that the tool thinks this belongs to, 21. By the way, just so you guys are aware, these are in order of price. So it groups the clusters based on what it feels they belong, what cluster they belong to, but it's also price. So if I were to select the lowest and then this, and I go up here to stats, and I go to average sale price over time, you can see the average sale price of this cluster compared to this cluster. You can also see how they behave differently. And so it's kind of interesting to see in different markets how different um, clusters of properties are behaving differently. And this is why it's important to really work and figure out what are the competitive properties in my market. Because if you just lump all these together, you're not going to get the same trend. If you're doing a higher end home, these things are taking off in this market, whereas the lower end, it's going up, but it's just not going up as much. And so something just to be aware of. But in this case, so we are going to use cluster 21 as our thing here. So we're going to draw our initial submarket. Again, you want to start wider typically than too narrow. And so I'm going to come down here. We'll come over here, up and over. Then I need to apply some filters. So I will do that now. And now you might wonder why this home was built in 1932. Why am I not applying a filter? In this market, there's a ton of older homes built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and also new construction. As you can see, kind of some of the newer construction there. I don't want to use homes in here, but these homes, most of these are really high quality and they've been renovated and added on to. And so when we look at effective ages in this market, a lot of these, the majority have a similar effective age to houses here. And so I'm not going to apply a year built filter. And then I'm going to say I want 3 garage space or less, and I want to apply some sort of a sale price filter. The property I'm appraising is probably 1 to 1.1 million. I just want to get rid of kind of the really low end and maybe anything above the really high end. So I'm going to apply that there, and maybe I'll stop it at 1.4 million. And keep in mind, when you apply these filters, even if you don't really need a filter necessarily for the subject, so let's say I don't want to do a garage. And I go, wow, the highest one's 4. That's fine with me. But you got to remember, this is when it goes to that universe of 6,000 home sales. If something has 8 garages, it's going to pull it in because right now we're only looking at the subject submarket. And so I want to make sure I don't get houses with a ton of garages because that just something weird's going on there. Okay, so I'm going to create the cluster. The model is being trained. It's being applied to all the other properties and trying to predict the sale prices. and let's see what we come up with. Okay, so let's zoom out and get a lay of the land again. So it's done a pretty good job. This northwest suburb is known for kind of being the more desirable suburb in the area. All these areas around it are inferior as far as prices once you've controlled for features. Um, and so this makes sense to me. However, I need to iterate on that because this is selling for less, as you can see there. You can see 6%, 12%, 16. Um, and what's really cool about this is this line, the tool does not know boundaries. It doesn't know streets. It doesn't know cities. It doesn't know school districts, census tracts, zip codes. But it learned that this line right here, something's changing over here. And what's changing? This is Park Ridge. This is Chicago. This is Edison Park neighborhood in Chicago. This is Chicago. Up here is Niles. Over here is Des Plaines. And so this really picked that up really nicely. And so what I want to do, I want to iterate on that cluster and I want to redraw these boundaries. And what's also interesting, you could see the metro right here. And everything within about a 20-minute walk of the metro is more valuable because people want to live close to there so they can walk. There's shops, there's theater, there's restaurants, there's all kinds of stuff down here. So I'm going to redraw my filters. And then keep the same, redraw my boundaries, keep the same filters, redo the heat map. It starts from scratch each time. That heat map just recalculated and figured all that stuff out. So now I feel really good about this. There's a little bit of difference here, but for the most part, this looks really good. And so if we zoom out, let's see what we got going on. This is the North Shore. This is where all the rich people live. This is downtown. And you can see it's all white. Now, it's white because either the 6,000 properties didn't reach that far or the 6,000 square foot lot size minimum that I impose, there's no big lots in Chicago. It's a bunch of tiny little 3,000 square foot lots. So you can see there's nothing that lies within the filters in those areas. What's really interesting is I've always thought of Elmhurst as a really similar market to Park Ridge. I won't go into all the detail, but I have done research on that because I had to use a comp from here on a really complex property before, and it was similar. And so what's interesting here is you have a Metra, the commuter train, that has a stop here, it has a stop here, it has a stop here, it has one in Glen Ellen, and these all have really similar downtown areas to Park Ridge, where they have a downtown, they have the Metro commuter stop, shops and restaurants, and within walking distance, and they have newer construction, and they have homes built in the 1920s and 30s, and so it's really cool that this picked these up as competing submarkets. And so when I click on these, never mind these. This is an older version of the tool. The data for the tool is not available in my market yet. This is a different version, but similar. So, and you can see that it's picking this up. Now, I want to define my market area. And so I don't want properties in Chicago in my market area. But these things in Glenview and Northbrook and Arlington Heights and all these other ones, these are completely reasonable. If somebody went to a realtor and they were moving to the Chicago suburbs and they said, I want great schools, I want walking distance to shops and restaurants, I work downtown, so I need to be within walking distance to a commuter train. These are all alternatives to Park Ridge. And so this makes sense to be in my boundary. So I'm going to constrain, but I don't want any of these because this is Chicago. And so I might go through here and filter those out, but I want to keep Glenview and Oakbrook. And maybe I come over here, down here, and this is my market area. And so now my data set, I've cut out those properties that were in Chicago, and so they no longer show up. And so what's also cool is if I want to compare, this is the same as the SS in the new tool. This is the CS. And so if I want to compare these two, these are all the green dots, and I want to compare that to the subjects market, I come up here and I click stats, and I go to average sale price over time. You can see the median sale price, the same trend, similar location, everything. Now, remember those other, the lower end ones, you can see those are kind of different trends in different areas. And you can kind of play with these things and see what all these different markets are doing. And I can also draw and I can analyze, there was those properties in Chicago here And maybe I want to see like, okay, were those really similar? And so maybe I try and grab those to analyze those. And you can see they're pretty similar. But again, I think most people moving to Chicago in this market area, they're going to either want to live in the suburbs or they're going to want to live in the actual city. There's different school districts. There's all kinds of different stuff about that. And so I would rather not include that. I would probably delete that from the data. Okay, so now we are going to travel to Texas and we're going to do a rural example. We're going to go to Whitesboro, Texas. It's about 70 miles north of Dallas, population of 4,181. So we got the features here. We're going to click Save and Classify, and let's see where we get. Zoom out. You can see Dallas Fort Worth down here. This is expanding to those 6,000 properties around the subject. We are cluster 6. And so there's some other properties up there in cluster 6, but let's stay focused here for now. Let's draw this and see what we come up with. So we're going to be a little looser on these filters because we're already only starting with 490 properties. And this type of property that I'm doing is not necessarily common for the area. So we're in a rural market without a ton of these properties. So let's see what we end up with here. 10 maybe. And now we're already down to 93 properties, which is not great. Um, but we still need to, we want to trim some of these outliers here. So I'm going to go 200 to 500. Okay, 70. So again, not ideal, but I want to show you a situation that's not great. And let's see if we can make the best of it and still make the tool work. Because if you're doing this and you're using the 1004MC for your time adjustments and you're using just the competing data set in that little town, you're probably not going to have, you're certainly not going to have as many as we're going to end up with. So let's see how we do here. Okay, so as we zoom in, we can see that this one dot is making this red. So I don't think that necessarily means this is a red different market, but it looks like maybe we can iterate on this cluster and maybe we could, let's see, go over here. I like all of this data over here, so maybe we could just come over here, down, over. Same filters. Now we're up to 187. I love that. And now it's going to retrain the model, recreate the heat map. Okay, and that's better. Now, these are in the light green, but I don't think there's a huge difference. It's somewhere between 3 and 6%. I think I'm okay with that. And we got all these properties. So I think what I would do in this situation is I would be good with that. And I would call this my submarket. Now I've got 187 properties and I can add in these other properties. So if I zoom out, you can see it's grabbing a bunch of other properties. If I say I don't want to go this close down into the city, again, I can define my market area and I can say that my market area is, I probably didn't need to go that far west, but you get the idea. And so now those properties wouldn't be part of the data set, but I still grabbed over double the additional properties. And so then when I do the market analysis, it should be a much more credible trend because I have more properties. Okay, so let's try a townhome here. I got one in Denver. I've entered in the basic home features. Looks like we got cluster 16 here. We'll use that as our guide and we'll start by drawing an initial subject submarket around that. And now we have to apply some filters. Then we want to trim some outliers here. So maybe we do 500,000 to 1 million. And we have 252 properties. Let's cut that out. So really we've only trimmed off 11 properties, probably 5%. Let's go ahead and create the heat map now. So that's loading, that's training the model on all the properties, trying to understand the relationship between sale price and features. And then it's going to try and use that model to predict the sale price of everything outside. If it nails it within 3%, it will be a green area. And if it's off by more than 6%, it becomes red or blue. So let's see what we come up with. Okay, so I think we've actually done a pretty good job this first time around. We could modify this, but I think for all intents and purposes, we are good to go here. We have 252 properties. We can add in these additional ones. Let's zoom out and see what else is going on. You can see this is because it's a hot area in Denver. Everything else is kind of inferior out around it. And so I may want to constrain what kind of properties it's picking up. Maybe this is my market area here. So I'm going to hover over the CS. I'm going to click that and I'm going to define my market area. And maybe this is what I want to define as my market area. All that's saying is ignore everything outside of that green market area. I only want to analyze things within it. And so let's move over here. And so we have, it looks like it's down 1.5% year over year. And so relatively stable over the last year, but a little bit down. You can see the time adjustments here. We can kind of look at that trend line. And if we determine that's stable, which the tool, anything within 2%, it's going to default to stable. I could actually change that to declining if I wanted to. But I also want to show you guys the statement here. So if you read after the italics, you read this part here. It says the sale price trend analysis indicates that any price fluctuations in the last 12 months were minimal. As a result, time adjustments to comparable sales were considered, but their impact on the opinion of value was determined to be negligible and therefore not applied. So if that is kind of the case, because you don't want to make time adjustments, simply copy that comment, put it in the report. But I also suggest if this is what the market's doing, just make the time adjustment. Call the market what it is. It's declining, and here's the time adjustments. So you are in control, and you can handle that. Oh, by the way, that comment, copy and paste it right here. So it's right here with this commentary. We can scroll down. We can see the supply is low and in shortage, so that'll check that box. We got days on market that's increasing a little bit. Sale final list price ratio right near 100%. That's an indication of a stronger market. Sale to original list price ratio is a little bit lower. And then we have the distressed sale trend, no distressed sales. We have the concessions. It looks like large percentage of these have concessions. So we go through there. We have all our stuff checked here. We can go through and check our boxes to make these decisions. I'm just making random ones. Anyway, you guys get the rest, and then you can go ahead and you can export that. And so when you export it, just a reminder, you want to make sure you situate the heat map in a way. This actually looks good already, but you can zoom in or out depending on what you want. If you want to get rid of those black dots, you hover down here and get rid of those. And as a reminder, most of your comps will come from here. If you need to search outside of here, this is kind of giving you an indication of where you might find some comps. And then you'll click export and you'll be good to go. Okay, so now let's do a condo. So we chose the condo form, we chose condo there. We got the features in. There's a couple of high rises right next to each other built in the 70s. So let's go ahead and click save and classify. We got cluster 10 here. So let's see where those are located. Not a lot of those going on. We seem to have quite a few home sales here. And if we look at the satellite view, we can see the two different buildings, and then you can see all the different home sales from either building in the last 5 years. And so we zoom back out, and so maybe let's get started. Let's just take a guess at what the boundaries are going to be. And maybe we do something like this. And then we need to apply some filters. So let's do maybe 800 to 1500 to 1960 90. Garage spaces 3 minus. And then let's get rid of the low and the high. So we go 150, 400. We got 136 sales. Let's create the heat map. So we have some similar buildings here and here. It looks like there's some inferior locations up here or building. It could be attributed to amenities. It could be quality. But we just know that that's probably not where we want to go look for comps. But there are some good ones here too. So if we got to go outside the building, and so we can turn those on and see where those are located. So I feel good about this. There's a little bit of red over here, but really, if we wanted to look into that, it looks like it's this little condominium project, and there was only really one sale that's affecting that. So I don't really care about that. So I feel good there. Let's zoom out. Let's turn these black dots off. Let's turn these green ones on so we can see where it's grabbing additional properties from. So maybe I want to constrain that. Maybe I don't want anything east of the interstate in my data set. And so I want to constrain and create a market area. So maybe my market area for this one goes along this line, comes over down here, and then it goes and follows this up to here. Remember what that did? That just said anything outside of this green boundary, I don't want it in my analysis. Get rid of it. So that's out. We have our subject submarket. But what we could also do here is we can define a project. So you see here, it says the project boundaries need to be defined before it can be used. We need to fill out that section of the 1004MC that includes the project. And so again, if we zoom in here and we look at the satellite view, we can kind of see where those two buildings are. And we want to draw boundaries just around those buildings so that we only get the sales from within that building so we can fill out that section of the 1004MC. So let's get this back on. We have our market area, the universe of data that we want to consider and where someone might look for an alternative to this area. They might come up here, they might look in this building here. And then we have our project. So let's move on to market analysis. Okay, and so I have both clusters turned on. We can turn one of them off if we want, and we can just focus on the subject submarket. But I think, you can see the level of green. When we turn that on, it gets a little bit thinner. The model is more certain about what's going on. And so the market is pretty clearly down over the last couple of years. If we zoom in on that 1 year, that's what that looks like. And then all of these, you can scroll through those. We've talked about all of these before. Let's come down here and look at the 1004MC for the condo project. So now these are just going to be sales from within the building over the last 12 months. These are the listings, and this is after the filters are applied. So whatever filters I had there. And then you have some commentary down here and some boxes that you can check that insert additional commentary. And then you can summarize this however you want to summarize your condo project. And then you go ahead and export that out into your report. Okay, so that concludes the training. I just want to hit on a couple of points here before we end. So 47% of the country is going to have access today. That's going to be January 16th. So we're doing the training, the webinar, and you'll have access. To find out if you have access, I'll show you that link here in a second. Another 40 to 45% of the country will have access in March. So we'll have that ready for you then. If you want to sign up, you're going to go to this link here. it will take you to here and you can go ahead and sign up here. It will also ask you which MLSs you're in and it will give you information as to whether or not that MLS is covered now or whether it's going to be covered in March. Um, if you're not in the coverage area today, maybe you're in the group that's in March, Spark, but you're in a Spark market. Spark is being updated now to handle nonlinear time adjustments by the end of January. So that'll be available to you and ready to go in time for the February 4th deadline. We're going to have office hours, at least probably for the next month, almost every weekday from 12 to noon Central. And so you'll go, I'll show you where to find that and the coverage area. So if you come here, the current MLS coverage, we have each state, we have the MLSs. Anything in green, that's going to be covered now. Anything with an asterisk, which is most of the rest of them, those are coming in March. Let's go back. You can see the office hours here. And so here's the link. You just click this, you'll go right into a Google Meet, and I'll be there. So any problems you have, any challenging issues, or just questions, or you just want to talk about the tool, I'll be on there to chat. So um, let us know how else we can help, and super excited for you guys to play around with this and give us your feedback. We have a ton of feature improvements on the list that we are prioritizing and trying to figure out what thing we want to do to improve this next, but we have a ton of really cool ideas. So stay tuned for that, and we'll talk to you soon.